They called him the King of Manhattan. Belvin Santoro wasn't just a mafia boss. He was an institution. A myth wrapped in Italian silk and cold calculation. And he never walked alone. By his side prowled Titan, a 140-pound American Pitbull terrier that the criminal underworld whispered had tasted more blood than most soldiers. Rival families crossed the street when that dog appeared. Federal agents requested backup just to surveil him. Nobody could approach within 10 feet of Belvin without risking their life. Until one night, an exhausted, desperate waitress named Naomi Rivers did the impossible. She didn't freeze. She didn't flee. She did something that stopped the heartbeat of every killer in that room and rewrote the rules of the Santoro Empire forever. This is the story of how a waitress calmed the beast and captured the attention of the predator who commanded it. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. Corso Ristorante wasn't just a restaurant. It was a cathedral for New York's most dangerous congregation. The marble floors gleamed like ice. The wine list read like a ransom note, and the air always carried the metallic scent of power and barely concealed violence. Naomi Rivers smoothed her crisp white apron, her fingers betraying the exhaustion that lived in her bones. It was her 6th double shift in 8 days. She needed this job like oxygen. Maya's oncology bills sat on her apartment counter like a ticking time bomb, and the tips from her morning diner gig in Queens weren't even touching the interest. Here, one good night could buy another week of hope. Table 7, Marco, the floor manager, a wiry man with nervous eyes, whispered urgently in her ear. And whatever you do, don't make sudden movements. He didn't need to specify who occupied Table 7. The entire dining room seemed to recalibrate its atmosphere whenever Belvin Santoro entered the space. He was the underboss of the Santoro crime family, a man whose reputation preceded him like a cold front. Sharp cheekbones, darker eyes that missed nothing, a tailored black shirt that probably cost more than Naomi's monthly rent. His presence didn't demand attention, it seized it. But it wasn't Belvin that made seasoned criminals swallow their fear. It was the shadow pressed against his leg. Titan, the legendary Pitbull, was mythology made flesh. Muscular and compact, with a brindle black coat that seemed to absorb light and scars that told stories no one wanted to hear. The dog wore a thick leather collar embedded with what looked like platinum studs, but no leash. No chain. Belvin didn't need restraints. Titan's loyalty was primal, absolute, and his violence was surgical. Rumor said Titan had put 3 men in intensive care last year during a botched hit. Another rumor claimed the dog could smell fear like blood in water and attacked weakness on instinct. Naomi lifted the silver tray carrying crystal highball glasses and a bottle of Macallan that cost $2,800. She inhaled slowly, forcing her racing heart to steady. Just pour the drink. Collect the tip. Walk away. She approached the private corner table. Belvin was locked in quiet conversation with a man Naomi recognized from the business section of the Times, Vincent Castellano, a real estate developer with known connections to offshore laundering operations. Castellano looked like he'd aged 5 years in the last 5 minutes, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide the fierce sweat darkening his collar, despite the restaurant's perfect climate control. Naomi stepped closer, her server's smile professionally neutral. That's when she saw Titan's head lift. Those dark, calculating eyes locked onto her with predatory focus. The dog's entire body went rigid, muscles coiling beneath that scarred coat. A low rumble started deep in his chest, not quite a growl yet, but a warning that raised every hair on Naomi's neck. She froze. Every instinct screamed at her to step back, to drop the tray and run. But another voice, older, trained, buried under years of financial desperation, whispered something different. That's not aggression. That's hypervigilance. That's trauma response. Naomi's breathing slowed. Her veterinary behavioral training, dormant since she'd dropped out of her graduate program 3 years ago, suddenly flooded back with crystal clarity. She recognized the tension pattern in Titan's shoulders, the way his ears tracked every sound, the microshifts in his weight distribution. This wasn't a monster. This was a weapon that had been forged through systematic brutalization. And he was about to break. "Excuse me, sir," Naomi said quietly, her voice deliberately calm and low register, addressing Belvin while keeping Titan in her peripheral vision. "May I set down your order?" Belvin's eyes lifted to her. For one moment, she felt the full weight of his attention, like being x-rayed by someone who could calculate your worth and weakness simultaneously. "Carefully," he said, his voice smooth as expensive bourbon. Naomi lowered herself slowly, bending at the knees rather than leaning forward, a non-threatening posture that wouldn't trigger a defensive response. She placed each glass with deliberate precision, movements fluid and predictable. Titan's growl deepened. Behind them, she heard Castellano's breath hitch. Somewhere in the restaurant, she registered the subtle shift of bodyguards reaching for weapons they'd never draw fast enough. But Naomi's focus narrowed to the animal in front of her, to the pain hiding behind the aggression, to the test she didn't even know she was taking. And in that crystallized moment of tension, before everything exploded, Naomi Rivers made a choice that would change 3 lives forever. She looked directly into Titan's eyes and recognized herself. Naomi's feet were screaming by the time the dinner rush hit its peak. She'd been moving since 5 a.m., the breakfast shift at the Queen's Diner, then straight across town to Corso without even stopping to change her shoes. The double espresso she downed in the subway was the only thing keeping her vertical, but caffeine couldn't touch the bone-deep exhaustion that had become her constant companion. She glanced at the slim watch on her wrist, the last gift her father had given her before the accident. 9:47 p.m. Maya's treatment window opened at 6 a.m. tomorrow. The deposit was due by noon. She was still $840 short, and the hospital billing department had stopped accepting promises 3 weeks ago. Just get through tonight. Smile. Pour drinks. Don't think about the numbers. But the numbers were always there, a calculator running in the back of her mind even as she navigated between tables filled with men whose shoes cost more than her monthly rent. Corso Ristorante wasn't just expensive, it was exclusive in the way that made Manhattan's elite feel dangerous. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over white tablecloths, but beneath the elegance lived something else entirely. Conversations here didn't involve contracts, they involved territories. Disputes weren't settled with lawyers, they were settled with implications and veiled threats delivered over perfectly seared wagyu. Naomi had learned to read the room within her first week. Table positions meant hierarchy. Seating arrangements telegraphed alliances. And when certain men arrived, the temperature dropped and everyone else suddenly remembered they had somewhere else to be. Tonight, the entire East Wing had been quietly cleared. Belvin Santoro sat at table 7 like a king holding court, his presence a gravity well that bent everything around him. 2 men in expensive suits flanked him, their eyes constantly scanning, hands never far from their waistbands. Across from Belvin sat Vincent Castellano, gesturing with increasing desperation while Belvin remained perfectly still, listening with the patience of a predator waiting for prey to exhaust itself. And beneath the table, barely visible in the shadows, Titan lay coiled like a loaded spring. The massive Pitbull's head rested on his paws, but his eyes were open, tracking every movement in the room with mechanical precision. Even from 15 feet away, Naomi could feel the threat radiating from him, a promise of violence held in check by nothing more than Belvin's silent command. Marco appeared at her elbow, making her jump. Table 7 needs a refresh. You're up. Naomi's stomach dropped. Can't Antonio? Antonio called out sick the moment he saw who walked in. Marco's smile didn't reach his eyes. It's you, sweetheart. And whatever you do, don't drop anything. Naomi was 3 steps from table 7, the tray perfectly balanced, when the air in the room changed. A man she hadn't noticed before, late 40s, expensive suit straining against a thick build, stood abruptly from table 12. His face was flushed, voice carrying across the dining room with the reckless volume of someone who'd had too much wine and not enough sense. "You think you can just take what's mine, Santoro?" The words slurred at the edges. "My territory, my connections, my—" "Sit down, Gallo." Belvin's voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk, quiet, but absolute. Gallo's response was to grab his wine glass and hurl it toward Belvin's table. Everything happened in fractured seconds. The glass shattered against the marble floor 3 feet from Titan, the explosion of crystal impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Red wine splashed across white tablecloth like arterial spray. Titan erupted. The Pitbull's roar was primal, a sound that belonged in a fighting pit, not a restaurant. The heavy chain securing him to the table leg snapped, actually snapped, and then 140 pounds of muscle and fury was airborne, launching toward Gallo with single-minded violence. Screams erupted. Chairs crashed backward. Belvin's security drew weapons in perfect synchronization, muzzles tracking Titan's trajectory, but nobody fired. The angles were wrong. Too many civilians. Too much risk of hitting their own boss. Titan hit Gallo center mass, driving him to the ground. The man's scream was cut short as massive jaws closed around his forearm, not quite breaking skin, but applying enough pressure to make bones creak. "Titan, heel." Belvin's command cracked like a whip, but the dog didn't respond. Didn't even flinch. That's when Naomi saw it. While everyone else saw a monster attacking, she saw the micro-details her training had taught her to recognize. Titan's pupils were fully dilated despite the bright lights. His breathing was rapid, shallow, a hyperventilation, not exertion. The way his body trembled wasn't aggression, it was a full-system panic response. The shattered glass. The sudden loud noise. The explosive movement. He's not attacking. He's trapped in a trauma loop. Titan wasn't choosing violence, he was drowning in it, reacting to triggers carved into his nervous system through repetition and pain. The breaking chain hadn't been defiance, it had been pure survival instinct overriding everything else, including Belvin's command. Around her, security was closing in, guns raised. She heard someone shout about putting the dog down. Naomi's tray clattered to the floor. And then she was moving. "Don't move." Naomi's voice cut through the chaos, surprisingly steady. She was already walking forward, hands visible and low, her body language deliberately non-threatening. "Lady, get back." One of the security guards reached for her arm. "Touch me, and that dog will rip through everyone in this room before you can blink." She didn't look at him, keeping her focus on Titan. "He's in a feedback loop. Every aggressive response from you is feeding it." Belvin's voice came from somewhere behind her. "Let her through." Naomi dropped to her knees 6 feet from where Titan had Gallo pinned, making herself smaller, less threatening. She could smell the fierce sweat pouring off Gallo, see the blood starting to seep through his sleeve where teeth had finally broken skin. "Hey, big guy." Her voice dropped into a specific register, low, rhythmic, almost melodic. Not baby talk, but a tonal pattern designed to bypass the limbic system's fight response. "I see you. I know you're scared." Titan's head swiveled toward her, jaws still locked on Gallo's arm. Those dark eyes were wild, unfocused. Naomi began a breathing pattern, slow inhale through her nose, extended exhale through slightly parted lips. Obvious enough for the dog to mirror if he could register it through his panic. She'd learned this technique working with combat veterans' PTSD service dogs, animals who'd been trained for violence and then couldn't find their way back. "Nobody's going to hurt you," she continued, that same steady rhythm. "You're safe. You did your job. You protected. But now you can let go." She extended one hand, palm down, fingers relaxed. Not reaching for him, offering. Letting him choose. For 3 heartbeats, Nothing happened. Then Titan's jaw pressure eased fractionally. His breathing began to slow, matching hers. The trembling in his muscles shifted from explosive tension to something closer to exhaustion. Naomi inched forward on her knees, maintaining that hypnotic vocal pattern. "That's it. Good boy. You're doing so good." Her fingers made contact with his shoulder. The entire restaurant seemed to stop breathing. Titan's jaws opened. Gallo scrambled backward, clutching his arm, but Naomi's focus never wavered. She was stroking Titan's neck now, finding the pressure points that could trigger a parasympathetic response, speaking in that low, continuous stream of reassurance. The massive Pitbull's body slowly collapsed against her, a 140-pound weight of pure exhausted surrender. Naomi looked up. Belvin Santoro was staring at her like she'd just performed a miracle, or a magic trick he desperately needed to understand. "Who," he said quietly, "are you?" The black SUV was waiting outside Naomi's apartment building at 7 a.m., idling like a predator that had all the time in the world. Naomi had barely slept. She'd gotten home at 2 a.m. with $400 in tips from last night, enough to cover Maya's deposit with $20 to spare and a business card pressed into her hand by one of Belvin's men. Heavy cardstock, no name, just an address in Tribeca and a time, 7:30 a.m. She'd almost thrown it away. Almost convinced herself that whatever happened last night should stay last night, that she should take her tips and her survival instinct and never look back. Then she'd checked her phone and seen the email from Maya's oncologist. The experimental treatment had an opening, but the full protocol would cost $180,000. Insurance covered maybe 30%. The rest was due within 6 weeks or they'd give the slot to someone else. So when the SUV appeared, Naomi got in. The driver didn't speak during the 20-minute ride. Naomi watched Manhattan slide past the tinted windows, the city transforming from her neighborhood's gritty authenticity into the steel and glass wealth of Tribeca. They pulled up to a converted warehouse with floor-to-ceiling windows and security that looked military-grade. Belvin was waiting in a penthouse office that felt more like a chess master's war room. Exposed brick, minimalist furniture, and a view that probably cost more per month than Naomi would make in a year. Titan lay on a custom dog bed near the windows, watching her with those intelligent, assessing eyes. "Miss Rivers." Belvin gestured to a leather chair. "Sit." She sat, refusing to let her hands shake. "How do you know my name?" "I know everything about you." He slid a folder across the desk. "Naomi Catherine Rivers, 28. Columbia graduate program in veterinary behavioral science, dropped out 3 years ago when your father had his construction accident. Currently working 3 jobs to cover your 16-year-old sister's cancer treatment. Maya, stage 3 lymphoma. Experimental immunotherapy trial at Mount Sinai. Cost $180,000. Due in 6 weeks. The casual violation should have terrified her. Instead, Naomi felt something colder settle in her chest. "What do you want?" "I want you to do for Titan what you did last night." Belvin leaned back, his gaze never leaving hers. "Full-time. Live-in handler. You'll have a suite at my estate, full security, and every resource you need. And in exchange, Maya gets her treatment. All of it. Paid in full. Best doctors, private room, experimental drugs, whatever she needs for as long as she needs it. Salvation and damnation, wrapped in Italian leather and cold calculation." "Why?" Naomi's voice barely worked. "You could hire anyone. Because Titan chose you." Belvin's expression was unreadable. "And I've learned to trust his judgment more than most humans." The Santoro estate sat behind 12-foot walls in Alpine, New Jersey, a 40-minute drive from Manhattan that felt like crossing into another country. Naomi watched through the SUV window as iron gates swung open, revealing manicured grounds that looked more like a military installation disguised as a luxury resort. Security cameras tracked their approach. Men in tactical gear patrolled the perimeter with dogs that weren't Titan, but looked equally capable of ending a life. Her suite was larger than her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked gardens that probably required a full-time staff. The closet had been stocked with clothes in her exact size, another reminder that Belvin's intelligence gathering was thorough and unsettling. But Naomi hadn't come for the accommodations. Titan's kennel was a custom-built space attached to the main house, climate-controlled and equipped with everything a dog could need. Except the dog barely used any of it. He spent most of his time in the corner, hyper-vigilant, tracking every sound and movement. Naomi started her assessment on day 2, after Titan had accepted her presence without aggression. She worked slowly, earning trust through consistency and patience, until he allowed her to conduct a full physical examination. What she found made her stomach turn. Scars crisscrossed Titan's body in patterns that weren't accidental. Cigarette burns on his flanks, old enough to have healed but recent enough to still be remembered. Fractures in his ribs that had set incorrectly, suggesting broken bones left untreated. His teeth showed signs of having been filed down and then allowed to regrow, a technique used in fighting rings to maximize damage while extending a dog's career. But the worst was behavioral. Titan flinched at raised hands, cowered at sudden loud noises, showed food aggression that wasn't about dominance, but about survival, the response of an animal who'd been starved as punishment. Someone had systematically brutalized this dog, using pain and fear to forge him into a weapon. Naomi compiled her findings in a detailed report and requested a meeting with Belvin that evening. He listened in his study while she laid out the evidence, her professional terminology barely masking the rage in her voice. Titan wasn't trained, she said, sliding photos across his desk. He was tortured. Someone used classical conditioning combined with physical abuse to create a hair-trigger response to specific stimuli. He's not aggressive, he's traumatized. Belvin studied the photos with an expression carved from stone. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled, and absolutely lethal. Who did this to him? I was hoping you could tell me. His eyes met hers. I acquired Titan 6 months ago. I was told he was trained for protection. He was trained for fighting. And whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. Naomi found herself in the kitchen at 2 a.m., unable to sleep, hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the glass of water. The panic attack had started an hour ago and refused to let go, her chest tight, breath coming in shallow gasps that never seemed to deliver enough oxygen. It had been Carlo, one of Belvin's soldiers, cornering her in the hallway earlier. Not threatening exactly, but standing too close, voice too low, asking questions about her arrangement, with the boss that carried implications she understood perfectly. When she'd tried to step around him, he'd grabbed her wrist, not hard, just enough to stop her. Just enough to send her nervous system into freefall. She'd locked herself in her suite for 3 hours, but the walls had started closing in. So now she was here, trying to remember the breathing techniques her old therapist had taught her, feeling pathetic and weak and so tired of being afraid. You're hyperventilating. Naomi spun, water sloshing over the rim of her glass. Belvin stood in the doorway, dressed in dark slacks and an untucked white shirt, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. I'm fine. The lie was transparent, her voice shaking. He moved into the kitchen with that predator's grace, but stopped a careful distance away, far enough not to crowd her. Carlo touched you. It wasn't a question. Of course he knew. He probably had cameras everywhere. He didn't mean. He did mean. Belvin's voice carried an edge that could cut steel. He was testing boundaries. Seeing if you were protected or just property. He paused. He won't make that mistake again. Naomi set down the glass before she dropped it. I shouldn't be this weak. It wasn't even, he barely. Trauma doesn't negotiate. Belvin pulled out a chair, sitting slowly, deliberately making himself less threatening. It lives in your body. Rewires your nervous system. Turns harmless things into triggers. She stared at him. How do you? My father used to lock me in the basement, sometimes for days. His voice was matter-of-fact, clinical. No light, no food. Said it would make me strong. Teach me that comfort was weakness. He met her eyes. I was 7 the first time. 12 the last time, when I got big enough to break the door. The confession hung in the air between them, intimate and terrible. I still can't handle small spaces, he continued. Elevators are calculated exposure therapy. Locked rooms trigger a response I've spent 20 years learning to control. A ghost of something that might have been a smile. We all have scars, Miss Rivers. Some just show on the surface. Naomi's breathing was steadier now. Is that why you understood about Titan? Scars recognize scars. If you are enjoying this moment of connection between Belvin and Naomi, please hit the like button. Comment Team Titan below if you're rooting for the dog to heal. Your support helps us bring more emotional roller coasters like this to life. But unfortunately, the peace couldn't last. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon while Naomi was working with Titan in the training yard. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Hello, Naomi. Her blood turned to ice. That voice, smooth, controlled, carrying the kind of confidence that came from always being the smartest person in the room. A voice she'd spent 2 years trying to forget. Marcus. You sound surprised. You shouldn't be. I've always known where you were. Marcus Vale's tone was conversational, almost friendly. Though I have to admit, your current living situation is unexpected. The Santoro estate. Very nice. How's the mafia lifestyle treating you? Naomi's hand tightened on the phone. Across the yard, Titan's head lifted, sensing her tension. What do you want? Want? I'm just checking in on my favorite ex-girlfriend. Making sure you're doing well. That Maya's getting her treatment. A pause that felt calculated. Though I have to say, the funding source is concerning. Federal prosecutors tend to take a dim view of cancer patients whose care is being bankrolled by organized crime figures. The threat landed like a physical blow. You wouldn't I? His voice hardened. One call to the right people at Mount Sinai, one whispered word about money laundering and criminal proceeds, and Maya's treatment gets red flagged. Federal investigation launched. All funding frozen pending review. You know how long those reviews take, Naomi? 6 months. Maybe a year. Maya didn't have 6 months. You destroyed my family. Naomi's voice shook with rage she could barely control. The bankruptcy, my father's business collapse, that was you. You orchestrated all of it. I created an opportunity. You chose not to take it. Marcus sounded almost bored. You could have stayed with me. We could have built something together. Instead, you ran. That was disappointing. What do you want, Marcus? Simple intelligence. Weekly reports on Santoro's operations. Security protocols. Business meetings. Names, dates, locations. You have access now. Use it. His tone turned sharp. And Naomi? Don't think about telling Santoro. I have documentation ready to go. One missed report, one hint that you've compromised this arrangement, and Maya's treatment becomes a federal case study in organized crime funding. I won't betray him. Yes, you will. Because you love your sister more than you hate me. First report due Friday. I'll send you a secure email address. He paused. Oh, and Naomi? I've missed you. It's good to have you back in my life, even if it's just professionally. The line went dead. Naomi stood frozen in the training yard, phone still pressed to her ear, while Titan pressed against her leg, a 140-pound reminder that she'd already chosen one monster to trust. Now another one held her sister's life in his hands. Naomi found the device during a routine morning walk with Titan along the estate's eastern perimeter. Something caught the early sunlight wrong, a metallic glint in the ornamental hedges where there should only be leaves. She crouched down, Titan alert beside her, and pushed back the foliage. The surveillance camera was small, professional-grade, wireless. Not part of Belvin's security system. She knew because she'd been briefed on the compound's setup when she arrived, and this wasn't standard placement or equipment. Someone had breached the estate. Her hands were shaking as she carefully extracted the device, using her sleeve to avoid leaving prints. Marcus's deadline was in 2 days. She drafted 3 different intelligence reports and deleted them all, paralyzed by the impossible choice. But this changed everything. If Marcus already had eyes inside the compound, then he didn't need her reports. He was using her as something else. Leverage. Insurance. Or bait. Naomi found Belvin in his study, reviewing security footage with his head of operations. She waited until they were alone, then placed the camera on his desk. I found this on the eastern perimeter. It's not ours. Belvin picked up the device, examining it with the calm of someone who'd expected this. Where exactly? Near the secondary gate. Hidden in the hedge line. She took a breath. There's something I need to tell you. The words came out in a rush. Marcus's call, the threats against Maya, the demands for intelligence, her paralysis over what to do. She expected rage, accusations of betrayal, maybe a gun. What she got was Belvin leaning back in his chair, expression thoughtful. Marcus Vale. FBI Special Agent, White Collar Division, stationed in Manhattan. He opened a drawer, pulled out a file, and slid it across the desk. I've been tracking unusual surveillance activity for 3 weeks. Had my people run deep background on everyone connected to this household. Your ex-partner's name came up with some interesting flags. Naomi stared at the file. You knew. I suspected someone was using you. I didn't know who or how. His eyes were cold calculation. This camera confirms it. He's not waiting for your reports, he's preparing for an assault. Using you as his entry point. What do you want me to do? Belvin stood, moving to the window overlooking the grounds. You have 2 choices. I can have you and Maya relocated within the hour. New identities, offshore accounts, protection until Vale's neutralized. You disappear and stay safe. Or, he turned back to her. Or you help me turn his trap into ours. Feed him exactly what I want him to know. Lure him into a breach on my terms. You want to use me as bait. I want to give you the choice. His voice softened fractionally. Scars recognize scars, remember? I won't force you into another cage. The intelligence Naomi fed Marcus was precise, detailed, and completely fabricated. Belvin would be meeting with his accountant in the West Wing study at midnight. Security would be light, skeleton crew rotating shifts. The panic room codes had been changed, but she'd included the new sequence. A perfect window of opportunity. Marcus took the bait. Naomi watched from the security room as thermal imaging picked up 6 figures breaching the eastern perimeter at 11:47 p.m. Professional formation, suppressed weapons, moving with the confidence of men who thought they had superior intelligence. They had no idea they were walking into a carefully constructed trap. Belvin's voice came through her earpiece, calm as always. They're past the first checkpoint. Right on schedule. Naomi's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were steady. She'd chosen this. Not the illusion of safety through running, but the dangerous reality of fighting back. Titan, ready, she whispered. The Pitbull beside her went alert, muscles coiling, but his energy was focused now, channeled through weeks of rehabilitation into something more precise than raw aggression. Marcus's team moved through the grounds like ghosts, avoiding the obvious security cameras, exploiting the blind spots Naomi had fed them. They reached the West Wing entrance. The door opened on the first keycode attempt, exactly as planned. Inside, the hallways were dark. Too dark. Too quiet. Marcus was third through the door when the lights blazed on and steel shutters dropped over every exit simultaneously. His team spun, weapons raised, and found themselves surrounded by Belvin soldiers positioned in elevated positions with perfect firing angles. FBI. Stand down. Marcus's voice carried federal authority, but it rang hollow in a space that recognized only one law. Special Agent Vale. Belvin emerged from the shadows, utterly calm. You're a long way from your jurisdiction. Naomi stepped into view with Titan at her side. Marcus's eyes widened, the first genuine emotion she'd seen crack his composure. Naomi, what? I made a choice. Her voice was steady. You taught me that everything's leverage. That power comes from controlling the people someone loves. She placed her hand on Titan's head. You were right. You just miscalculated who had the leverage. Belvin nodded to his men. Agent Vale's weapon. Carefully. As they disarmed Marcus's team, Belvin produced a tablet, turning it to face Marcus. While you've been focused on me, my attorneys have been quite busy. Offshore accounts in your name. Documented communications with criminal elements you were supposedly investigating. Evidence of racketeering, extortion, wire fraud. He smiled without warmth. All delivered to your supervisors at the FBI 20 minutes ago. I believe the term is comprehensive corruption investigation. Marcus's face drained of color. Naomi crouched beside Titan, meeting Marcus's eyes one final time. Maya started her treatment yesterday. Full protocol, best doctors. And you'll never touch her again. Federal vehicles arrived 30 minutes later, real ones, responding to documented evidence against one of their own. As they led Marcus away in handcuffs, Naomi stood beside Belvin on the estate steps, watching justice delivered through channels Marcus had thought he controlled. If you enjoyed this story and that satisfying ending, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next episode. Now, back to the final moment. What now? She asked quietly. Belvin glanced at her, something almost like respect in those calculating eyes. Now you decide who you want to be. The woman who survived, or the woman who builds empires. Naomi looked down at Titan, then back at the fortress that had become her home. Both, she said. I choose both.